Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and in this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. We have significant number of very interesting details and updates, so let's start. First let's talk about Kharkiv direction. We have additional updates about the situation in the village of Gluboka. The Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were flying above this territory and bombing the positions of armed forces of Russian Federation. This is very important video because this video confirms the line of combat contact. This is the Russian positions that confirms that's most likely these streets, Yubileyny Street, under complete Russian control, but the street further in the northern direction, Naberezhny Street, is already under the Ukrainian control. Now let's move further. Let's go to the area between Gluboka and Lukyantsy. The Ukrainian sources published the video of living road of armed forces of Russian Federation, the road that the Russians were using for supplying and supporting their forces inside of Gluboka. And as you can see, the Ukrainians were doing something like calculations in this video, and they counted around 10 armored vehicles that were destroyed during this process. So the situation for the Russians in Gluboka is not so good. The main reason is that one of the supply roads that we have between Strelechna and Gluboka itself was cut off by the Ukrainians, and the rest of the supply road, this one, is under complete Ukraine FPV drone control. So regarding the fact that the Russians still in Gluboka, most likely they will be forced to fall back from this small village. Now let's move to Volchansk direction. We have additional updates from the area to the east of Bugrovatka. The group of forces north stated that they managed to improve their positions more, and on the left bank of Seversky Donetsk, near the settlement Bugrovatka, the Russians cleared the forest belt. So most likely the Russians were talking about this short forest belt. Furthermore, in the same report, in the same statement of the group of forces north, they reported that they managed to, there are significant advances in high-rise areas. So that was also stated by the group of forces north. Currently, we don't know for sure where exactly the Russians managed to improve, how many high-rise buildings they managed to capture, but the only statement that significant to improve. What does it mean? For now, we don't know for sure. But probably during the upcoming day, we're going to receive some geolocations or videos confirming additional Russian progress. Now, let's move to the northern Kupiansk direction, where we also received significant number of very interesting details and updates, and the most important are coming from the village by the name of Pishchane. If you remember, just yesterday in the evening we were talking about the situation in this area. According to the geolocations we received during the previous day, we have adjusted the map between the fields, and today the pro-Ukrainian mappers Deep State reported about additional control of Russian forces, and that the Russians control already around 40% of the village. If you remember, the main topic that we were talking about in this area is the possibilities of the armed forces of Russian Federation after complete control over Pishchane to establish fire control over the main supply roads that goes from the northern Kupiansk to the central Kupiansk direction. As for the Russian sources, today they gave additional updates, and the Russians are saying that the Ukrainians were completely defeated in the village of Pishchane. Once again, according to pro-Russian sources, the Ukrainians were completely defeated in Pishchane, and the situation is so critical that Ukrainians are running away, abandoning their positions, dropping their weapons, dropping their vehicles, and I don't know what is happening there according to the Russians. So of course it may be just a wishful thinking episode from the Russian side, but maybe the situation is completely correct and corresponds to the reality. So if summarize everything, according to pro-Russian sources, they managed to establish complete control not just over the village, but also the Russians established complete control over the stronghold that located in the northern part of the village. We're talking about this territory, as well as over the entire village itself. So according to pro-Russian sources, this is approximately the territory that was captured by the Russians, and the current status and the current configuration of the line of combat contact in this territory. Obviously significant progress of the armed forces of Russian Federation. Hard to believe in this, but let's wait, because if it's true, sooner or later we're going to receive either a video with the Russian flag or the Ministry of Defense report. Anyway, despite the fact whether the Russians managed to capture this territory or not, we see the let's say the vector and the area the Russians are heading to, once again, to cut Kupiansk direction at least in two parts. Now let's move further. In the southern direction, we have additional updates from Makeyevka itself. The pro-Ukrainian sources report about additional progress, additional gains, that the Russians managed to clear this tree line and to establish stable positions there. And the Russian sources are saying that, not the Russians, but the Ukrainian sources on the ground reported that currently there are very heavy clashes inside of the village and that the Russians are about to capture this territory completely. Now let's move further. Let's go to Toretsk, New York agglomeration. We have additional updates and very important adjustments on map. As for Toretsk, New York area, as you can see, we don't have any changes on map, just regular activity. The Russians are bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions, and currently the Russians are trying to enter a residential area that located to the west of Gorlovka. So this territory, as you can see, was under very heavy fire. The Russians were bombing this territory with SOS flamethrower systems, preparing the foothold before further offensive, and most likely during the day the Russians will try to capture these streets and this part of Pivnichny itself. As for this citadel, we haven't received anything, just confirmation from pro-Ukrainian sources about complete control over this small block. Now let's move to New York. As for New York, we have additional updates. As you can see, we have adjusted the map. We have colored the village of Yurievka almost under complete Russian control. We have important videos from this territory. For now, you need to understand that nobody knows for sure how exactly the line of combat contact goes in this area. Some mappers are showing that the residential area is under complete Russian control. Some mappers are showing that the Russians are advancing along the railway. So nobody knows for sure what exactly is happening, because it was so unexpected. It was a real surprise when the first geolocations with the Russians were discovered somewhere in the vicinity of Yurievka. But despite and regarding the complete absence of any videos and confirmation about how the Russians managed to break through the southern part, we have additional videos from almost the central part of New York. For example, in this video we can see the artillery preparation, how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainians inside of this territory. Probably the Russians were trying to get two goals. First of all, to not allow the Ukrainians to counterattack the Russians while clashes on Petrovska Gora. On the other hand, the Russians probably were preparing the territory before further attempts to attack this territory on the ground. So we don't know for sure what exactly was happening there, but we have the video from Petrovska Gora. If you remember, during the previous days we got a lot of updates that the Russians entered the territory, some mappers adjusted their maps and many other things. And today we got the final video geolocated confirmation of Russian presence in this area. For example, in this video we can see the Ukrainian Bradley, who was attacking the Russian forces, and this attack was conducted by stormtroopers of Skala Battalion. This is like a rescue team. Skala Battalion is like rescue team. If something goes bad on this and that direction, they usually send this Skala Battalion to stabilize the situation or something like this. The last time we saw Skala Battalion took place in the vicinity of Vladimirovka on Ugledar direction, when some forces, armed forces of Ukraine, were encircled in that battle. So the Ukrainian Bradley was discovered here, was geolocated here, which confirms that they were trying to counterattack the edge Russian positions here. So that's why we have adjusted the map and colored this territory as contested area, because we don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to dig in deeper, or that was something like forces who were located very far from the main Russian positions, just like a security team, like alarm team, if they discovered the Ukrainians, to fight with them while the main Russian forces are clearing Yurievka and this part of New York, Novgorodska. So anyway, despite the fact what is going on there, we know for sure and we see for sure that the Russians are about to raise the flag in New York right before the NATO summit in Washington. So very important updates, and the situation for the Ukrainians is getting worse and worse. Now let's move to the western Avdiivka direction, where we received also significant number of details and updates. According to information we have, the Russians currently are the main clashes inside the Yevgenievka are taking place already in the central part. The pro-Ukrainian mappers have adjusted their map, and the most important update, as we discussed yesterday, the Russians managed to capture the tree lines along Volcha River, along Karlovka, almost along Karlovka water reservoir, And this is additional gains of the armed forces of Russian Federation during the previous night, without, of course, geolocated confirmations. We expected that maybe during the previous night the Russians would enter the northwestern part of Novoselivka, Persha, but instead of that, the Russians decided to improve their positions, and most likely now they are ready to begin offensive in the northwestern part, and probably by the next morning we're going to receive updates accordingly. As for South Donetsk direction, Krasnogorovka, Novomikhailovka, Konstantinovka, there are no changes on the ground, just small and few video geolocations of how the Russians were FPV droning the Ukrainians in the eastern part of Krasnogorovka, which confirms that there are still very heavy clashes, but without any changes or progress on the ground. The Russians are not in a hurry, they are regrouping, they are getting additional forces, they try to prepare themselves before probably the final push. As for 79th Assault Brigade, today they published a lot of very interesting posts about the situation on the ground. They are saying that the Ukrainians for some reason decided to begin counterattacks in direction of Paraskovyevka, and as a result of those counterattacks the Ukrainians suffer significant losses, but for some reason they are not planning to stop. They continue. Maybe the Ukrainians managed to discover that the Russians removed some forces from Novomikhailovka, probably towards Toretsk, New York, and now the Russians have lack of forces there, and the Ukrainians decided to use this situation to counterattack, and maybe this is the reason. Currently we don't know for sure. As for Urozhaina, we haven't received anything during the previous 24 hours. There are still very heavy clashes, but without any changes on the ground. And now let's move to Odessa, Kherson direction. Today the Ukrainians continue their flag game. They establish another Ukrainian flag somewhere in the fields with drone over the Russian positions. Just a regular activity. Probably there are a lot of drones that are flying above this territory, trying to track the Russians who decide to remove the flag. And as soon as the Russians do this, they will attack these soldiers with more FPV drones, probably. As for Odessa direction, we have a very interesting video. Let's say at the same time when the Western countries promise more and more Patriot systems to provide more Patriot systems to Ukraine, the Russian sources published the video how they managed to discover the radar in the vicinity of Novobelary, Yuzhne in Odessa area, and also the Russians managed to discover the position of Patriot system, and after that, as a result of Iskander strike, both the radar and the Patriot system were destroyed. I'll remind you that during the previous days the Western countries promised significant number of to provide significant number of air defense systems, not just of Patriot but also a smaller one, so they're trying to defend the Ukrainian sky before possible deployment of F-16s. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds you can condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.